Okay, step into my shoes for just a second. In this explainer, acting as a clinical psychologist, I'm going to walk you through a psychological autopsy of a very specific, incredibly severe kind of trauma. We are going to examine the profound moral fracturing that survivors experience when pushed to the absolute brink of human endurance. We're heading into the death zone.
So, to really wrap our heads around the true emotional cost of survival, we have to start by asking ourselves a terrifying question. What happens to human morality when the air becomes too thin to breathe? I mean, we all like to think of ourselves as inherently good people, right? But can our deeply held moral compass actually withstand a freezing neo-noir prison of dark rocks and ice? Does our humanity just evaporate when oxygen levels plummet?
Section 1. The Sea Level Contract. Empathy as baseline. Right, so before we ascend, we really need to establish our baseline down here, where the air is warm and safe. At sea level, we define ourselves by our empathy. Our entire social contract is built on helping those in need. It's literally an evolutionary advantage. But in the realm of high-altitude survival, the rules completely flip. Driven by strict prioritization logic and a sort of mechanical triage, that exact same empathy becomes a literal death sentence.
Down here, we naturally operate on what philosophers call Kantian ethics. It's the belief that certain actions, like, say, helping a dying person, are universal moral duties, absolutely regardless of the personal consequences. It feels so absolute to us, doesn't it? We fundamentally believe we just have to help someone in need, no matter the cost.
Section 2. Mirror of the Death Zone. Stripping civilization. Now, here's where things get really intense. When the environment actively tries to kill you at 8,000 meters, you realize the mountain isn't just a physical obstacle, it's a dark mirror. It's this cold, monochrome prison for human morality that doesn't magically change who you are. Rather, it violently strips away the comfortable, warm layers of civilization until only cold prioritization logic remains. You're reduced to your absolute, most primal, calculating self.
Section 3. The Tragedy of David Sharp. A haunting case study.
To properly diagnose this psychological trauma, we have to trace the creeping, inevitable nature of this tragedy. Think about the ascent. Bright mountaineering gear stands out vibrantly against the black rocks. But by the time David Sharp collapses and freezes near the summit, a terrifying shift occurs. Over 40 climbers, wrapped in bright yellow and red, creating this incredibly jarring visual contrast against the bleak, pitch-black landscape, walked right past a dying man to reach the summit. Empathy was literally abandoned in the cold.
You know, to fairly evaluate these survivors, we have to completely erase the hero's journey we're so used to seeing on screen. We expect movie heroism, those dramatic against-all-odds rescues. But as a psychologist, I have to replace that fantasy with the grim reality of mechanical mountain triage. And that reality? It means literally stepping over a dying human body just to conserve your own limited oxygen.
Section 4. The Cold Math of Survival. Brutal Ethics.
So to understand these horrifying choices, we have to look at the extreme environmental stressors. At this insane altitude, that Kantian duty to rescue, it dies. Utilitarianism completely takes over. The doctrine of maximizing overall survival. The cold math dictates that in the death zone, trying to drag a completely incapacitated person down a sheer cliff face just means that 2 more people will likely die in the attempt. The unheroic reality of abandonment becomes, well, it becomes a chillingly logical survival tactic when you look at the stark calculation of human life. You have incredibly low oxygen, minimal daylight, and extreme bone-deep exhaustion. The math is brutal. Saving 1 guarantees 2 dead. The cold math absolutely leaves no room for sea-level morality.
So, we have to truly judge the morality of these survivors. Does an absolute duty to rescue still exist when the air is actually gone? Can Kant's universal moral duty survive at -40 degrees? Or does the freezing landscape actually give us permission to abandon our humanity just to save our own lives?
Section 5. The Psychological Ghost. The Mind Fractures.
Okay, this brings us to the sobering conclusion of our clinical evaluation, and the diagnosis here is incredibly severe. The body survives using cold prioritization logic, but the mind fractures under the weight of it. There is a profound cognitive dissonance, because even if the climber's body makes it back to the warmth of sea level, the human mind simply cannot process the cold math it used to survive. They're left with the haunting, inescapable guilt of mechanical triage. The cautionary reality of this trauma is perfectly captured by a single, chilling thought. The ghost isn't the person left on the mountain. It's the version of yourself you left behind to survive. The real, lasting trauma isn't frostbite. It's the sheer psychological toll of realizing that, to survive, you had to actively kill the most civilized, empathetic part of yourself.
As we close this clinical file today, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder about your own social contract and your own morality. If you were standing in the pitch black of the death zone, utterly exhausted, freezing, with barely enough oxygen to keep your own heart beating, would you stop or would you keep walking? What would you do if you ever looked into that frozen mirror?